This is the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast. Kane, Pittman and Olgun Ulrich back with you as we are every single Tuesday, and just some fascinating results in the NBL across the weekend. If you're like me and you don't do tipping, you probably don't worry about it too much. But I can't understand, Olgun, how you can possibly get through and pick these results from week to week because it's been chaos and we saw it again, even with some of those teams that had the doubles. But I do want to congratulate you right off the top as well, though, Olgun, because you didn't annoy any players over the weekend, it seemed. You were able to keep yourself out of the headlines, which may be not great for this podcast, but I'm happy for you, my friend.
Thanks, man. Especially because we had Adelaide coming into town in Melbourne.
Yes.
So there was ample opportunity for me to go and fight someone if I wanted to, physically or otherwise. But I abstained. I wasn't going to do that. And we got a very weird game of basketball, one of like the 2 or 3 blowouts we had this week.
Yeah, we did. And I was disappointed watching that game. I was waiting for the moment where Adelaide win the game on a Kendrick Davis buzzer beater and he looks to the corner to you and he says some words or he points to you or something like that. So unfortunately, we'll have to wait for that moment. I still hope that it comes at some point in this season. The 36ers and Melbourne United, we're going to get to them in this podcast. I also did put out on Twitter that on October 10 last year, I declared the Tassie Jack Jumpers that I was 10 out of 10 on the Jack Jumpers' ability to win the title. Now, a sequence of events happened that allowed them to win that championship. And now, on October 15, I told you that I am ready to, again, make a declaration for a team that I believe is going to be there at the end of the season. So we're going to get to that. The Sydney Kings, any concerns there just with the way the offense is going? So plenty to get to. It would be wrong probably to start anywhere else than with the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix, though, Olgun. And, anytime a head coach has moved on, particularly this early in the season, it's noteworthy. So Mike Kelly is out. Sam McKinnon is going to be the interim. But you were at the press conference yesterday. What is the team saying? Because I can't wrap my head around the idea that this is any type of pressure relief, particularly when you talk about the 2 guys that were at that press conference in Tommy Greer and Simon Mitchell that have been around this club for a long time and they haven't got to where they want to.
Yeah, so last season, this team was 10-18. They start this season 0-5, right? So the pressure was already on going into the season. As soon as you start this, there was a feeling that they were going to give this half the season anyway. And if the team, let's say, was at 5-9 or something like that, then they'd put consideration into potentially either moving Mike on or maybe even signaling probably the end of the season, then we'll move on from you. 0-5 was sort of like an irredeemable situation. And then the loss to Brisbane felt like 4 or 5 losses in its own right because Brisbane was the other winless team. We spoke about this last week on Nothing But Net Aussie Hoops, that the pressure was mounting and the decision makers were looking closely at Mike Kelly's job. I didn't think it was going to happen the following morning. So we finished up at John Cain Arena. We finished up there at 10-11 p.m. The next morning, 8 a.m. is when I was told that this has happened. So it happened very quickly overnight. It was Tommy Greer, Simon Mitchell, Romy Chowdhury, the owner of the team, coming together, making that decision. Sammy McKinnon is in as interim head coach. And the feeling is, it's a weird one. That from what I understand, they've told him it could be 2 games, it could be 10 games, it could be the rest of the season, it could be multi-year. They're waiting to see what he can do. But in the meantime, they are conducting their search. There's no real sense of what they want yet. I asked Simon Mitchell in the presser, what is the expectation on this sort of team? Is this like a Cairns Taipans or a Brisbane Bullets where you're looking for a cycle where you potentially go get a younger coach, someone not as proven, and build that into like 2 or 3 year blocks? Or is this Southeast Melbourne Phoenix that spends a lot of money and wants to compete every year, therefore you go and get someone more demonstrated? He wasn't quite sure yet. It seems like they're very open to whatever. They're very open to timing as well, as far as whether they get someone in 2 weeks or 2 months. I think they're honestly open to everything because they're at the very, very start of this process.
Yeah, I mentioned just the fascinating situation because I don't know, just coming into the year, clearly it's a complete reset from a roster point of view. And I think if there's one thing that we've learned in terms of the personnel on this team, how many times over the years when there was key injuries, which felt like it was every season for this team, there's certainly been some bad luck along the way because I like some of the rosters that they've been able to put together. But the health stuff has always seemed to curtail their chances when it got to the postseason. But my God, Mitch Creek saved this team a lot as well by being the Iron Man and just being that MVP caliber player. And now he's gone. They're trying to figure out who they are. And I know that they actually have a lot of individual talent on this roster, but even someone like Nathan Sobey, who, to be honest, it feels like he's getting criticized a lot. And I think it's a little bit unfair. We also need to remember he's 34 years old now. This isn't Nathan Sobey from 5 years ago where he was that primetime scorer in the league. So I don't know about the roster balance of this team, but just for Mike Kelly as head coach. So I already mentioned, obviously, Tommy Greer's been there for a long time and certainly gone through all the frustrations that this club has had. But then you had Sam McKinnon there on the bench, who last year was an interim head coach with Brisbane. And we were sitting in a press conference and he declared publicly his desire to be a head coach. Then you have the former head coach in Simon Mitchell hanging around behind the bench sometimes in these games. Like, it's just a bizarre setup that they have. And they're all great fellas, and they are honestly a club that you want to see do well, but it's just an interesting makeup that they've got, and I'm curious to see what it looks like moving forward.
Yeah, so I asked Tommy Greer yesterday at the press conference. I was like, I gotta be honest, is everyone's job here safe? Yeah. And it seemed like a resounding, like, yeah, of course. Now that he is the CEO, then there are people above him, right? There is Romy Chattery, the owner of the team. There are owners in that team that could then just say, it's absolutely not. But it was a question that needed to be asked, and it's a legitimate question that people around the league are asking, which is, this is like another year of the Phoenix not looking amazing, and it's not just the fact that they had to fire Mike; it's the fact that they hired Mike in the first place. Who our reporting at the time was Trevor Gleeson was someone who there was some interest in. Aaron Fern was someone they were interested in. Fernie didn't want to leave America. They looked at an overtime elite coach as well. It would have been a package deal with Alex Sarr. That didn't go through. And so Mike Kelly was there as sort of like the easy option. It wasn't safe. A safe option is like the Sydney Kings getting gorged, right? Because this guy is demonstrated as hell, and it is the safe and also good option. Mike Kelly was just there. And I think they just figured, all right, he's here. Let's just go get him, right? And when I was writing my story, I got triggered when I had to write that Mike Kelly was 40-85 as a head coach. He could win the next 40 straight games as a head coach and still be below 500 as a head coach in the NBL. So there was that decision making, and then just the way this roster was built. And I know you weren't particularly high on this roster build from the get go, right? I think a lot of us thought it'd be awesome offensively, but just the lack of cohesion among this entire group just really, really isn't there. To the point where, as much as Sam McKinnon wants to get his bona fides as a head coach and hopefully put wins on the board, I don't know if the personnel is there for there to be some sort of substantial turnaround with this team.
Well, what I would say is when you look at this game against Brisbane, and this was the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, for Mike Kelly, you're playing another team that hasn't won a game. You're on your home floor. You can already get the sense around the team, and I'm sure this was part of it for the decision-making as well. I'm watching, obviously, on TV here in the US, and I can't remember seeing the lower bowl of John Kane Arena with that much space in it and that many empty seats. So already now, I don't know if there was something else going on in Melbourne, but all of a sudden now you're not even filling out the crowd. I know the curtains up there you could see on the broadcast. So there is more at stake here. They need people to actually invest and have some interest in this team, and they have not been a fun team to watch so far. But you could also tell that in a game that should have been absolutely all-out desperation, they gave out endless offensive rebounds, and they just didn't match the energy of the Brisbane Bullets team. Now, they nearly still won the game, but I do think you bring in a new coach, and we'll see. But you should be able to tell pretty quickly whether that effort level changes, because it didn't look like this was a happy team. It didn't look like they were fully engaged. And even just little things like you're coming up against Brisbane Bullets. Everyone's talking about Nathan Sobey coming up against his old team, and things clearly didn't end well there. And then you bring him off the bench. I'm like, what are we doing? This is the one game that you would start him against his old team where he's highly motivated. So there was just so many bizarre things going on. And that's why I think you probably get to the point where you got to do it, whether or not you feel good about it or not.
Yeah, the Sobey, we were all not calling for it, but we all, I think, saw the balance of this roster and said Sobey probably has to come off the bench at some point, right? A lot of us flagged this before the season. Don't do it against Brisbane. If anything, if anything, just like, and again, him being motivated is one thing. It just feels a little bit unfair. Like, don't let him, don't put him in that very awkward position against his former team where there was a not so amazing split between those two parties, right? Just save it for the next game if you're going to do that. And you call the criticism of Sobey unfair. I don't think it's particularly unfair. He is regarded as this certain level of player, and he's not up to that level right now. I think maybe people were expecting a bit much of him, based on what we've seen the past few seasons as far as his efficiency and whatnot goes. But I think the criticism's largely fair. I think people have avoided criticism. I think someone like Joe Wieskamp has avoided some criticism because of just maybe the idea of the player he is. But he's supposed to be this high-level offensive player. Hasn't really shot it well. He's not a great defender. Matt Hurd is someone who has carried this team offensively, but he's also not a great defender. So there are a lot of pieces here that I think individually, like you say, they're cool. They just don't really fit, and I don't see a world where they do fit.
Well, to be fair, to your point, you're probably right there. And I would say that, probably all the players deserve some criticism at this point in time because it's been a really rough start to the season. We'll see if they can get back on track under Sam McKinnon. Now it's time to shift gears to a team that we have not spoke about, I don't think, once on this podcast so far this season, and it's malpractice on our part because they are very, very good. And we're going to get things going with PointsBet built different. And this week it's going to be Chris Goulding, game 450. And the NBL put out the social posts from the Gold Coast days to the Melbourne Tigers days to now obviously Melbourne United, which we've seen over the last few seasons. And to be fair for Chris Goulding, so far hasn't shot the ball as well as he would like, but still at his age in his mid-30s, he still looks like he's moving as well as he ever is. And for him to look after his body to this point in time, to get to this stage in his career, 450 games, and still be so vital to this team's championship aspirations, Chris Goulding continues to be a star in the league.
And look, Chris Goulding has clearly slowed down, right? This is what happens with father time. But there was a point in that third quarter against the 36ers where he hit a three, then he gets into the lane, hits a little short jumper, gets in the lane again, finds Jack White with a no-look dime, forces a timeout. We're going to see spurts from Chris Goulding, whether it's multiple threes in a row, whether it's unbelievable creation, playmaking, shot making. He is still at the level to provide so much impact for this team. And 450 games is so many games. And when you watch him, it's not just his capacity, his ability, but you can see how comfortable he is. You can see this is someone who has just had rep after rep at the NBL level. He's the most comfortable player I've ever seen out there.
Yeah, and just a tough shot maker. He's still getting up 9 threes per game for this Melbourne United team. And selfishly, I hope that he's around the league for multiple seasons still to come because he looks like he's got plenty left in the tank. And 500 games probably not out of the question. So that's Chris Goulding, PointsBet, built different.
What are you really gambling with? For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.
All right, you are listening to the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast. Don't forget, Nothing But Net Aussie Hoops every single Thursday night on ESPN. You can catch up on that, hopefully on the social channels as well. We're just working on getting the full shows up on YouTube as well, so you can catch up. You can comment on the show and get involved. Olgun's there every single week. Ryan Brockhoff has joined us in the US. He's in studio every week, and he's doing some great content. He had a great video breakdown of how the Adelaide 36ers have been able to get their offense functioning on the floor in these last couple of games here, last couple of rounds. So check it all out. Great content, great guests every single week. ESPN on Thursday night. That's Nothing But Net Aussie Hoops. And that is a nice way to lead us into largely a greater conversation about Melbourne United, but in some part, the Adelaide 36ers, because what we saw on Sunday afternoon at John Kane Arena, I said we haven't spoke about Melbourne, but this was the perfect example about why this team is a high-level championship threat, because the defense is just absolutely unbelievable. And this Adelaide team, the last 3 or 4 games has been unstoppable. That was not the case here, and they were frustrated and they were suffocated right throughout this game, particularly in the second half.
Yeah, so Melbourne does this thing often where they just get Shea Ely and then they can rotate someone and they just neutralize a player. They did that to DJ Vasiljevic, right? 8 points, 1 assist in that game. Just really struggled to do anything because of the pressure that United put on him. And then in the second half, I think Adelaide sort of went into their shell and didn't really move the ball in the same way they did in the first half of that game. That was largely because of the United defense, which is led from the head, which is Shea Ely, Matthew Dellavedova, Ian Clark. These guys play up and in. They're in their drops, but these guys chase over. They don't allow any openings. And this is what happens when Adelaide, which is like a relatively new team when it comes to a lot of their core, right? 2 new imports. They're still figuring out how to play alongside each other. New head coach goes up against a very organized team. It's a team that's been together multiple years. Even the new additions are additions of old. So the continuity is absolutely there on both ends of the floor. You saw it defensively where they were on a string. They knew exactly what their scheme was, exploiting the lack of spacing that Adelaide is sort of forced to play with by starting both of those bigs. And then offensively, Adelaide's guards just have to be better at staying in front because there was a lot of line drives. There's a lot of guys getting 2 feet in the paint, dishing off. It was Rob Lowe's best game of the season, maybe Marcus Lee's best game of the season because of just the openings that Adelaide allowed. So this is the difference. Adelaide, yes, on the second night of a sort of the back-to-back in the NBL where you play a Friday evening and a Sunday afternoon. But this is what it looks like when you have a team that's still figuring some stuff out, as talented as they are offensively, going up against probably the most organized team in the league.
Yeah, isn't the first and isn't the last team that's going to get shut down by this Melbourne United defense. In my handy little notebook that I have here with all my scribbling and notes that I take from watching the games, I've just got Rob Lowe with 3 exclamation marks. Isn't this a guy that retired a year ago? What's going on with this man that is now starting on a championship contender?
He didn't retire because his body was broken or whatever. There were other circumstances that led to his retirement. And then as soon as Dean Vickerman said, like, hey, do you want to keep playing for me? I think Dean Vickerman was probably the only coach that Rob Lowe would have exited retirement for, and he's done that. And so you got to remember this. When Rob Lowe retired, he was probably considered the best available big man, at least the best available local big man on the market, right? Adelaide put forward a high money offer for him. New Zealand didn't match what Rob Lowe wanted, and so he just retired. But there were teams around the league that were ready to make him their starter. And this is a New Zealand NBL MVP, New Zealand NBL Defensive Player of the Year. He's still a high level player. He's not that old. This is an effective player. So Dean Vickerman, that relationship got him out of retirement, and he's awesome.
Yeah, he is great. And the big man duo in general, we've discussed this, and I'm not so much with Rob Lowe compared to Marcus Lee, but there was a stretch there in the third quarter of this game when Melbourne were really taking over, where Marcus Lee, I think on 4 possessions in a row, finished on lobs or on offensive rebounds. The athleticism to bring him out, and he just changes what they can do offensively. And then you put Jack White at the 4 as well. The lob game, I wouldn't say, no offense to the Melbourne United fans out there, but I wouldn't say, over the years that Melbourne United has been a team that I'm like, geez, I just can't wait to watch Melbourne United. It's such exciting basketball. No, they're just solid as shit, and they just get the job done defensively, and they have shooting, and they'll just beat you. Like, they're just a really classy professional team. But this year, we're actually getting highlights. Daly, the best lob thrower in the game. He's done it in the NBA for as long as we can remember, all the combinations that he had, whether he was playing with LeBron, playing with Giannis. But now he's linking up with Jack White. He's throwing lobs from half court. This Melbourne team might actually be entertaining to watch.
It was funny because the first 2 games of the season, they weren't connecting on those lobs. They were a split second behind. You'd see Delhi throw a lob up and it'd go behind Marcus Lee's head or something like that. They're figuring each other out. We're seeing over this round, and I think last round too, more lobs from this team. And I agree, it's Delhi, it's Marcus Lee, it's Jack White. We forget how powerful and athletic Jack White is as a basketball player. And it's, Shilly's getting in on the lob throwing game as well. Like, this is what they wanted. They wanted to replace Arul Hukporti with another player stylistically that's similar to him, and that's Marcus Lee. And one fun thing is, every time Marcus Lee throws down a big dunk, he sort of slaps the ball away. And Dean Vickerman is getting very annoyed at it because it's a delay of game. Then if you get another weird one, it's a technical. And so Dean's told him to cut that out. But this team is fun. I think the people around the league are maybe concerned, are they one scorer short or one creator short? I don't personally think so. But I think that's what some people are saying. They're the best defensive team in the league by a significant margin right now. But offensively, can they keep it up? I think they can. Some people around the league are iffy on that.
Yeah, that was my concern actually last season with this team. And the roster isn't that much different to last year. It's very similar across the board. You bring in some pieces there. That was my concern last season. And yet, again, they're just so professional that they didn't win a title because of some unbelievable shot making. Let's face it. I mean, that was a great grand final series that we saw last year, and they were still so close. So I can't bring myself to be too worried about it again, even though you look at some other teams like a team that has the firepower of the Sydney Kings or an Illawarra or Adelaide while they're still working it out. But I think Melbourne, they're going to be a team that we'll probably talk about on this podcast once every 3 weeks, and we'll be like, yep, they're still winning. Yep, the defense is still the best in the league by a mile. So Melbourne United, they are cruising right now, and they look fantastic. And Dully, you mentioned him. It is just fun to see him still thriving at this point in time. He had injuries going back and the concussions a few years ago. I'm not sure that there would have been many that would have betted that he would be still here and having such a big impact and looking great, just looking healthy as well. So it's good to see Dally and fun to see him out there. Adelaide, though, I've still got a big wait and see on the Adelaide 36ers. I thought the win over Sydney was great, but I don't know what to make of the defensive performance of Adelaide in that game, because I thought the Sydney offense was absolutely deplorable, and I thought that they just bailed out Adelaide all night long by shooting threes. So I didn't know really what to make of that win, even though you take it. And then they do get shut down really for the first time this season, and I'm equally not as concerned about that, because Melbourne's going to do that to teams throughout the year, and on days where their defense looks great, they're going to dominate teams. The guy I do want to ask you about, though, is Montrezl Harrell. You've got reporting at espn.com.au. It looks like they're inching towards keeping him here for the whole entire season. And before you give us the latest there, I would say that the thing that, and to be fair, I don't know why it would surprise me. I didn't know Montrezl Harrell at all, but I was curious coming off the injury, figuring that the NBA was where he wanted to be. It was said it was a short-term contract. Initially, he wanted to go back. I didn't picture him buying in so heavily to everything this team is doing. And he is playing team basketball, and he doesn't have to dominate stretches of games. He just does fit like a glove. The guys all seem to like him. It's been actually just cool to see from that team building perspective.
Yeah, like the thing that stands out with him is the motor, right? And that, I think that translates from level to level.
Yeah.
And so he's come and he's done that. He's very vocal. And like, I'm sure that can also be a flaw as well. The fact that it's always got to be like the last voice in the room and things like that. But for a team that can lose a game by 30 points to Melbourne, it's probably important to have a vocal guy, a leader who will go and call guys out. As for him staying, so it was originally injury replacement for Jarrell Martin. So the expectation was as soon as Martin is back, Montrez would have to leave. Now, they've been working on a full-time contract to keep him here for the remainder of the season. They have effectively agreed on that. And the 36ers are in the process of deactivating a local player. Now, I don't know. I imagine they're going to finalize that today or tomorrow. It's going to be Alex Darling. Alex Darling will be out. They'll be working with his people on that. And Montrezl Harrell will come in full-time. And then it's, what does it look like on the floor? Mike Wells spoke about the challenges of playing Montrezl Harrell and Isaac Humphries together. It was a pivot they had to make, because if we're going to have these two guys, we've got to use these two guys. But we saw what Melbourne did against them, really packing the paint. They'd kick it out to either Montrez or Isaac on the perimeter, and everything would stop. Because while they're both, I guess, they're not absolute non-shooters, they're not guys who want to lean into shooting that ball. And so how they go going forward, if this offense, I wonder if it stays at that level, if people realize that they can just pack the paint and exploit the fact that this team has no spacing. And then defensively, we said it last week, though, at least the numbers say they're the worst defensive team. The numbers indicate that they're not a great defensive team. And I think that starts with the guards being able to contain guys. And then that's generally not fair on, Isaac and Montrez, who are they usually play in the drops, and they've got to guard 2-on-1 for a lot of the time. So they've got to fix some stuff there. What's fixable from like a personnel perspective? I don't know how good their defense can really be. Mike Wells is a new head coach in the NBL, so there's a lot they need to figure out there. But there's a glimpse of a really fun, enjoyable team that could be high-powered. Whether they're sustainable to win long-term with a very iffy defense right now, I don't know. But at least right now, the numbers say that they're a fun offensive team, below-average defensive team. Does that win a championship? I don't think so. But at the very least, they'll be very enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, they are must-watch for me. Out of the teams, they're in my top couple that no matter what game they're playing, I'm fascinated to watch them, because whether it goes well or whether it goes wrong, either way, they're entertaining, and they've just got stars. And I know we mentioned DJ had a tough day against Melbourne on Sunday, but I walked away from the game against Sydney where he went crazy, and I think he had 6 threes in the first half or whatever he was doing. He was going absolutely berserk. And at that point in time, I'm sitting and I'm looking at the numbers. I'm looking at the fact that he's also facilitating, and again, from a distance, looks like he's been grown as a leader for this team. I'm saying he's in the MVP conversation right now with the way that he started the season. Obviously, it was a tough one against Melbourne, but he's been that good. So I think that Adelaide, to me, project as a team in the back half of the season. They'll have an opportunity to be at their best when you consider Mike Wells, as you pointed to, and also now just trying to fit in Jarrell Martin. But just on the surface, if you're telling me that they cut Starling and they sign Harrell for the rest of the season, I'm pretty sure Mike Wells and the 36ers fans will be happy to figure out that rotation and whatever the hell it looks like, because that is a very, very nice 5 stars that they'll have when you put Martin out there.
And again, that theoretically helps the spacing. Once Joe Martin's back, I've been told that they're expecting him to come off the bench, at least to start. And I think that would probably be a long-term thing. And we know how he can shoot the ball. We know how he can score the ball. So that would open things up for both Isaac and Montrezl. So there's a world where this works. Again, we just have to see who stays healthy, whether they can get it together defensively. There's like a theoretical idea of a cool team here.
Now, just on the Sydney Kings, I just had some quick notes on them. I mentioned the game against Adelaide was just incredibly disappointing. It's just a group of 5 guys on the floor taking turns, getting shots up. And it's interesting because their assist percentage is the highest in the league by a mile because they do make shots and they will hit threes, but they're taking nearly half of their shots are from the outside. A lot of them don't look like they're great shots, and then you've got guys coming off the bench, and it's like, okay, now Isaiah Leafa's going to shoot a 3 off the dribble. Now Quat Noy's just firing from everywhere, and it's the starters as well. But just the offense with so much talent, I suspect that they'll clean it up. So I'm certainly not panicking about it, but the numbers are pretty clear early. When they shoot 35+% from 3, they're 2-0. When they shoot below 35%, they're 2-2. And I think that they've got too much talent to be a team that just lives or dies by the 3. They've got so many other ways that they can dominate teams on the offensive end. And some of it might actually just be involving Xavier Cooks a lot more than they have. Now, he's averaging 18, 9, and 5, or 18, 9, and 4. So his numbers are great. He's shooting over 60% from the floor, and it still feels like there are stages where he's just not a part of it. So I think they'll figure it out. But we've seen in stretches that this is a team that can just get a little lazy on the offensive end.
Yeah, they're shooting 36.5 3-point attempts a game. There's so many attempts.
Yeah.
And up until this point, they hadn't really been making them consistently. The game against Cairns was interesting because the ball sort of whipped around a little bit better.
Yeah, it did.
And I think that's the nature of not having Jalen Adams in the lineup for that game. So there's a balance they have to find there. And I think Gorgon mentioned it in the postgame presser that, yeah, you have Jalen Adams being really talented in the middle of the floor, coming off on balls and things like that, but there is talent on the wings too. And I think the way that the Illawarra Hawks play, and I know we're going to touch on them at some point, the way they play is the way that I assume so. That's how the Sydney Kings should be playing, which is use your depth, play up and in. You have a lot of wing options, like just force possessions, basically. That's what you need to do. If they're going to shoot a ton of threes, just get more possessions, and generally the math will work in your favor. But when I speak about like the best players in the league and the player in the league who I feel the safest with on the floor, it's Xavier Cooks. As long as he's on the floor, on both ends of the floor, I feel pretty safe that the Sydney Kings team is going to be relatively functional on both ends and really effective. So again, as long as he's there, then you should feel pretty comfortable if you're a Sydney Kings fan.
Yeah, agree with that. Not too worried about the Kings at this point in time. And, Adelaide, as I mentioned, Melbourne will stop teams defensively. Adelaide will just outscore teams on certain nights throughout the season as well. I was just a little curious, and, you've been in the press conferences, and what have you made of Sean Bruce? I thought it was fascinating in the game against Adelaide that they're going to Tyler Robertson for those sort of backup guard minutes. And I actually thought in that game against Adelaide in the third quarter, Sydney started to run some offense. And I thought Brucey was a big part of that because he came off the bench. Jalen Adams was injured. But if Adams didn't get injured, it didn't look like Brucey was going to play at all. And this is really interesting because he's been such a solid guard for this team. And even when they were winning titles with Chase Buford, Brucey was on the floor in big fourth quarter moments, taking big shots and helping run the offense. So I found it a little curious that his minutes were down. Then, of course, Adams misses, and it wasn't necessarily Brucey running offense. He was just going ballistic from the outside and couldn't miss a 3. He was sensational. But I do think that he can be an important cog in the leadership, in the communication, and he's just a spark plug as well. So I've been a little fascinated that they've gone to Robertson over Bruce. I'm curious to see how it plays out the longer the season goes.
Yeah, I wonder if they think in the long term, let's say if you put meaningful reps into Tyler Robertson at the start of the season, by the middle of the season, that's going to be better for this team than giving those same reps to Sean Bruce. If Sean Bruce is shooting the ball the way he is, then you don't necessarily have to play him at the point. You can play Tyler Robertson and Sean Bruce together. So that's probably the thinking, that if we get reps into Tyler, then he'll be better come mid-season, come end season. But I liked what we saw from Tyler Robertson in that Cairns game, coming off on balls, looks a little bit more comfortable. Honestly, just getting reps into him is very helpful. It's clearly working from the first game to now. He's played 2 games, and you could already see the growth, right? I think he just needs to be out there.
Yeah, development, and he's got obviously more size and he's physical, and some of those drives get into the basket. So not necessarily disagree with the decision, but it was fascinating because I do think in times when the Kings do get a little bit lost, they've got a nice option there on the bench. And we know Brucey, he likes to talk and he likes to get involved. And I almost wasn't surprised that he had that game on the weekend after seemingly being benched the other game. There's a bit of FU in Brucey, whether it's to his own team or to the opponents as well. So it was fun to see. And obviously, the Cairns Taipans, we broke them down in detail last week. I just can't. There's no Taron Armstrong. I just can't take anything from those games. And obviously, a little bit of a disappointing weekend for them.
No Taron Armstrong, no Tanner Groves. It's your starting point guard and an impact import. Like we're not gonna. Yeah, it was probably disappointing. They probably would have wanted to go 1-1 this week. Probably beat Perth. Don't lose to Sydney by the amount that they did. But I'm not putting any stock into it. I don't think this is indicative of what they are.
On October 10th, last year, I said that I was 10 out of 10 on the Tassie Jack Jumpers. Some people ridiculed me. And by some people, I mean you, Olgun. And so now, on October 15, 2024, I would like to declare the small town Illawarra Hawks as not only a title contender, a team that can win the title this year. And I have got a long host of numbers and reasons why I think that this can happen. What's your initial reaction to the Illawarra Hawks? Currently 4-1, and they look great.
Have you ever been to Wollongong?
I don't believe so.
Okay, interesting. No, it's just I just you've covered this league for a good amount of time. You've never been to Wollongong. All of a sudden, you're their biggest fan.
Wow.
Illawarra is looking really cool and really fun, and they're crazy high-powered offensively. I think they're still average defensively. That can change, obviously. The blueprint against Tasmania was cool. You making this declaration after they pantsed the clear worst offensive team in the league is brave. But I'm excited to hear why.
So there's a number of reasons why, and I know it does come, fittingly after the biggest loss the Jack Jumpers team that also close to my heart have ever had. But this Illawarra Hawks team, the reason why I believe that they are going to be set up to have success in the postseason is not so much about the 4-1 record now, because it hasn't been perfect. They gave up 102 points to Adelaide just last week. So I agree there might be defensive concerns. But I got a lot of faith in Justin Tatum, man, and what he's been able to do with this team. And I use Tyler Harvey as my first example. When you think about Tyler Harvey and what he was like in this league, yes, he was a star. Yes, he was a shot maker, but he wasn't necessarily efficient. And he might have taken some of the worst shots in the league. He doesn't do it anymore. And I actually spent some time with Tatum in the offseason and asked him about Tyler Harvey specifically. And he said, yeah, it was a little bit of a work in progress. We had to try and help him understand that by taking those shots, he's not necessarily helping the team, and how he can still be a star and not have to take those shots. And if you look at just his shot diet so far this year, so last year, 50% of his shot attempts were threes. This year, that's down to 45. The mid-range shots are down from 8% to 4%, and all of those shots are coming in the floater range and at the rim. They're efficient shots for him. That's his bread and butter. So Tyler Harvey all of a sudden has become a guy that you can rely on offensively to take good shots. Now, he'll still have his moments. I think the other part of this that helps him is Trey Kell having another star guard. Now, hopefully he stays healthy, but that will be a big part of this. They're also the best offensive rebounding team in the league. This is a physical team that hits the offensive glass, creates second opportunities for this team. And with that offense, they're going to make the majority of those. And it does come from some of the guys they have on the bench. And obviously, Dave O'Hickey's been a revelation, really, since Tatum took over for this team. He's gone to a new level here. They've got 5 guys that are averaging double digits on the offensive end, with Harvey, Kell, Froling, Days, and Lee as well. Olbrich is only going to get better. And Wani Swakala-Bullock is playing the role that Sydney Kings wish Bull Qual was playing. He's been disciplined. He's knocking down shots that are open for him. He's not going outside of his role. He's been excellent. And I thought the defense, because we talk about defense and size and whether teams can actually defend, I think the Hawks will get better the longer the season goes on the defensive end. I don't think they're going to be Melbourne United. But what I saw in the Tassie game, even if that is an offense that isn't exactly high-powered, everything the Hawks did was connected. The effort was there. They were willing to stick to the game plan, whether it was zone. Okay, now we're going to blitz a pick and roll. Now we're going to hedge and recover, and we're still going to get out to the 3-point shooters. It was so disciplined. This team is playing for Justin Tatum, which makes me believe that the longer this season goes, they should get better. And if they can engage like they did in this game because they wanted to prove a message, this is a team that's going to be tough.
So the offensive rebounds is a real thing. I think forcing turnovers is a real thing.
Yeah, high steal team, yeah.
And now if you go back to that game, I think Illawarra and Tasmania largely shot a similar percentage, but Illawarra got a ton more possessions. Yeah. And if you're going to give that team possessions, they're a high-powered scoring team, right? They're the best offense in the league right now. They're going to score on you. So giving them possessions is your death knell if you let them do that. I think when people look at the imports from last season to this season, there's the instinct is to connect Justin Robinson with Trey Kell and then Gary Clark to Darius Days. I'd flip those. Your main creator guy is Trey Kell. So that's gone from Gary Clark to Trey Kell. And then the Justin Robinson replacement, he was sort of your third import. That's like what Darius Days is. Now, the fact that Trey Kell is such an elite on-ball creator, coming off screens, getting 2 feet in the paint, that just opens up so much for Tyler Harvey, because Tyler Harvey can then attack once the defense has already been bent. So he's going to go and attack that. You can't help off Darius Days because he's a high-level 3-point shooter. So offensively, I really like this team. And the continuity, we've spoken about it all season with a lot of teams. There's continuity on this team. As much as it's not there with Trey Kell and Darius Days, it's there with Tyler Harvey and Sam Froling, who has just been rock solid again. It's Will Hickey and Lockie Albrecht coming in again, Mason Peatling. There's continuity on this team. There's a connectiveness there, and the talent is there to be high-powered offensively. And like I said when we spoke about the Sydney Kings, the fact that this team can just play up and in, force turnovers, make it really difficult for your offense to function, that's important. This Wani Swakala Bullock is not necessarily it's what he was with the Kings a few years ago, where all the talent around him is so capable. So he's only required to do 2 things, and he's doing that at a really, really high level. He just has to guard the point of attack and hit corner threes. That's really all he's got to do, because he's going to get those looks because he has talented offensive players around him who are going to bend that defense. So the pieces are fitting right now. Whether they can collectively defend it in the half court at a high level, that's what you look at when you talk about winning down the stretch, winning in playoff games. But right now, the early signs look really, really good. Yeah,
the defense, no question, is going to be the thing to watch over the season. And does it improve? I think it will, because I just think that they have the defensive pieces there to be better. But over the course of a long season, we see it. They'll have slip-ups, and they might give up 120 points this week. Like, I don't expect them to play their best basketball now, but I've seen enough in a couple of big games where they're really engaged and really locked in. They're like, this defense isn't that bad. It just fluctuates from game to game whether they have that effort and whether they are locked in like that. So I'm feeling pretty confident that they're going to be one of the teams near the top.
But that's why I'm not making a declaration, though. I'm out on a limb. Of course you are. But the defense, we know how good you have to be defensively in this league to win down the stretch, right? Until they show that consistently, I'm not going to make a declaration. I'm going to say that they're in the mix. They absolutely are. But a declaration is so brave.
It is, yes. And, maybe I've got ahead of myself after last year with the Jackies. And like I said at the start of the podcast, the Jack Jumpers needed some significant luck and some crazy events to win that title as well. The Hawks are going to be the same. It's going to be for any team that wins this, there'll be some luck along the way. Last point I want to make, Sam Froling, you mentioned him as just a really, solid guy. Feels like he's been around the league forever. He's still so young. I saw something yesterday in that game, or 2 days ago in that game against Will Magnay in a primetime Aussie big man matchup, where Sam Froling sometimes feels like he's just floating around on the floor and he's not taking over the game like he can. He decided that, no, I'm going to dominate this matchup. I'm going to be the best player on the floor. And it looked like he took it personally. And I like to see that, because that's the Sam Froling that can help take this team to another level as well.
That was the play-in game last season, was where I think Will Magnay looked like crazy. Superman against Sam Froling. And then there were questions about Sam Froling, and then Froling went and beasted against Melbourne United, against JLA and Ariel Hook-Porty, right? So we know what Froling is, right? Froling is super talented. And again, he's just rock solid is probably underselling it, right? Being that reliable is such a skill that is so important to any team. But going up against Will Magnay, the guy who made that Boomers team for the Olympics, that's an important matchup. And I think a lot of Australian bigs and Kiwi bigs in the NBL look at that matchup and think, all right, this is supposed to be the premier big, especially the premier defensive big in the league. like, I'm going to go at you. I think at this point, Will Magnay, I'd have him in my sort of defensive player of the year sweepstakes. I think he's been that good.
Yeah.
But credit to Froling for not just, winning that matchup, but like going at him. Like, he wasn't afraid to use his skill set to work around Magnay. He wasn't scared of Magnay. A lot of people are scared of the rim protection, the shot deterrence. Froling was ready to trust his skill set, trust what he's got in the post as far as his counters and his footwork, and it paid off. And when you have that sort of Sam Froling doing his thing, just opens up everything for all the shooting in this team.
All right, that's a pretty comprehensive wrap of the Illawarra Hawks and really the entire league. I thought you've been pretty good today. Hey, I thought we should mention New Zealand Breakers just quickly before we go. We haven't forgot about the New Zealand Breakers, but we just haven't seen them play for weeks. And when they were playing in the US, we didn't really want to bring it up because the results weren't great for this New Zealand team. Of course, there's been some media from the team and very positive trip, all the rest. But now it gets real. You're 2-0. You pointed out before the podcast started that they beat Brisbane and the Phoenix. So I think that's very valid.
Two high quality wins.
Very valid. So what do we know about New Zealand? The answer would be nothing. And now they got 4 games in 10 days. They go straight off the plane to Brisbane. Now, Brisbane just coming off a win. Who knows? It's not easy when you've been on that US trip. So I continue to say it. I don't know why they go to these US trips. It doesn't help them during the season. But I'm looking forward to actually sinking my teeth into the Breakers and seeing what they look like back on home soil, even if these first couple of games might not be totally indicative of what they're capable of.
Yeah, they looked really good in those first 2 games. They beat 2 teams at a combined 1-8. 1-8 on the season. So
1-10. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, look, New Zealand right now, they're top of the table. With respect, just live it up now, because I don't think that's going to remain that way for a significant amount of time. But in the meantime, have fun, enjoy it.
Yeah, those 4 games in 10 days. So this isn't in order, but they got road games in Brisbane and Sydney, and then they're at home to the Phoenix and Perth. So a couple of tough ones in there. We'll see what Perth does or how healthy they are. We didn't talk about the Wildcats today either, but looking forward to it. And by the way, NBA starting next week as well. ESPN, your home for hoops. You know where to watch that. Plenty of Aussies right across the league and Kiwis. Steven Adams, of course. Not Australian. I had to let the many Americans over here know, like that reporter that asked Jock Landale about having another Aussie in the locker room, and he had to say, no, Steven Adams is not, in fact, Australian. So anyway, we'll see how the NBA goes. NBL this weekend is going to be a lot of fun. Olgun, I'll see you Thursday night. Nothing but net Aussie hoops. We look forward to it. And hopefully everyone listening or watching can join us there as well. Another big week ahead.
Thanks, Kane. I'm excited for it. I like doing the Aussie, nothing but net Aussie hoops hits. They're fun. And Ryan Brockhoff is really good at this. I think people should. I want to get him on this pod at some point. I should have told you this off air. I want him on this pod in stretches. I think he'd be good value here.
So he is going to be. Well, he already is a star, but he's going to be an even bigger star. Like, no question, he admitted, first time in studio, there was some different things going on. A little bit nervous. I think he's better for the run. I thought he was great. He's going to be even better this week. We also have a 1-hour NBA special on Wednesday morning, and that's going to be replayed through Wednesday as well. Brian Windhorst, Tim Bontemps, a bunch of people joining the show there. So we're going to have a lot of fun there. That's it. Let's wrap it up. 43 minutes. I went a bit too long on my Illawarra Hawks rant there, but Hawks fans, hopefully you're listening. Hopefully you enjoyed it. He's Olgun Ulrich. I'm Kane Pittman. This is the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast. We'll see you next week.